Donald Trump is unfit for office, and the only clear choice in the 2024 election is Kamala Harris. This choice has nothing to do with enthusiasm for Kamala Harris or policy preference. This vote is about the preservation of democracy. Donald Trump continually and illegitimately leverages his power to undermine the two main underpinnings of democracy: the peaceful transfer of power and upholding the law. The preservation of democracy supersedes my policy preferences, so even if Donald Trump's policies did align more with my political leanings than Kamala Harris's, I cannot cast a vote for a presidential candidate who has shown time and time again that he will spit on the democratic foundations from which policy is born and encourage others in power to do the same. What does arguing over policy even mean when one side is a credible threat to free elections and the rule of law? That would be like if you were the owner of a restaurant trying to decide which of two chefs to hire, and one of the chefs tells you he'll incite a riot at your restaurant if you fire him, and he'll in the oven. At that point, who cares who makes better food? It doesn't matter how tasty the tacos are when the kitchen's on fire and smells of feces fragrance number 5. Only one candidate has shown through repeated action and mountains of evidence, which we'll go through, that he will light the types of fires that will help him entrench power even as it burns down democracy. I've listened to Kamala and Tim Walz, and I've listened to Trump and JD Vance. I actually like a lot of Trump's policies, which have been articulated through JD Vance, especially the ones about ending the stream of proxy wars that the US continues to fund around the globe. Over the last half century, we've burned billions of dollars bowing to the military-industrial complex by inserting ourselves into wars with disastrous outcomes. I'd love a president who stops using the US military as big brother defender around the globe and instead puts those defense dollars to better use at home. This isn't 1950. Let's stop playing the superpower savior under the guise of spreading democracy while the war machine choreographers stuff their pockets. Where my Afghanistan's at? In the real world, effective foreign policy, and any policy really, means nothing without law-abiding leaders who uphold democracy at home. Now, you may be thinking, what about Kamala's record as a prosecutor? Hasn't she done a lot of shady shit as someone whose job it is to uphold the law? Maybe so, but there's no evidence to show in her record that she will go as far as to subvert the law to actively interfere in free elections and incite a violent insurrection to entrench her power. I've probably lost a decent chunk of you already just by saying that I'm not voting for Donald Trump, but I hope the rest of you will tune in to hear some of these arguments. Again, I'm not enthusiastic about Kamala as a candidate, and I wouldn't even classify myself as a Kamala supporter. I'm just a dumbass podcaster who should probably shut the f up. In my mind, nearly all politicians are dirty, compromised pieces of shit who will do almost anything to latch more securely onto the teat of power within a set system. Then, there are others who are willing to blow that system sky high to keep that power at the cost of preserving democracy. If you care about democracy, the peaceful transfer of power, and your right to free elections, you may want to stick around. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Zach Show Election Special. And if you're here with me right now, listening to this or watching this, it means you're fucked. And the rest of this country, and possibly the world, is also fucked, because I am the last person who should be talking about any sort of politic take or trafficking in faux political expertise, because that's what I am. I'm a political fraud. By recording this podcast, I'm not an expert. But the reason I'm doing this is because it has been brought to my attention through various independent resources, news resources, independent journalists, whatever you want to call it, who have written about things that have happened during the January 6th insurrection, the lawsuits surrounding Donald Trump since 2020, the actions that Trump has taken against citizens of his own country, or of his own country rather. And I sort of put that in the back burner of my mind because a lot of it was ridiculous. And I wouldn't even believe that Donald Trump was capable of doing some of those things. In my mind, he was this firecracker president. He mouths off on Twitter, says crazy shit, but in the end, his policy is filtered through to generate things that are not totally unreasonable for the country. That's the opinion I had of Donald Trump, that he's a fucking psycho on Twitter. He's crazy. He's a troll. Entertaining to watch, no doubt. Would, probably be fun to have on the podcast just to kick it with Donald Trump. Unless you asked him any sort of probing question or non-softball question, then I'm sure he would walk out of the room immediately. But he seemed like the type of person who was like, yeah, he's that fucking crazy uncle. He gets wild and rowdy. But in the end, he's not as harm-driven as he comes off. And through my research over the past week or so, because I'm trying for the first time in my life to actually be an informed voter rather than just saying like, yeah, this person seems cool enough, I'm just going to fucking tick that off. I'm trying to be a responsible voter. And that's hard for me because I'm a complete piece of shit degenerate. But I've done some research, and it turns out that Trump did almost all of the things that these independent journalists have accused him of that don't really make it through into the mainstream media. And I'm not talking about one side of the mainstream media. I mean like Fox News, CNN, like whatever side you want to pick. There's just not been a trickle down of the major facts to come out with the things that I'm going to talk about. And so in the intro, I laid out essentially what I'm going to argue, that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, that he is unfit for office. And this podcast is going to largely be the case against Donald Trump. And again, me recording this podcast means we're fucked regardless, because I should be the last person to be recording an episode like this. I don't have, when it comes to politics, I'm going to be totally honest. Before a week ago, I couldn't verbalize a single Trump or Kamala policy. If you asked me, why are you voting for Trump or why are you voting for Kamala? Name a single policy. I would have stared through your soul and hoped to God that you weren't recording this, so I wouldn't be one of those dumb people on YouTube that's, out in the streets and someone comes up to them and is like, so you support Trump? Name a single Trump policy. And they're just like, fucking border wall, dude. Immigrants, dude. Fucking immigrants, motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? Hell yeah, brother. Come on. And I was one of those people. I still am one of those, fucking uninformed people. Largely, I don't pretend to be super informed because I've done, a dozen or so hours of research looking into things. So I'm going to try to be a dumb person that walks through the research that other people way smarter than me have looked into and have published things, and this has been verified. There's text from Trump, there's tweets from Trump, there's indictments, there's Supreme Court testimony under oath from both sides, Democrats and Republicans. A lot of the sources I'm going to go through deal with the January 6th report, the Jack Smith indictments, the U.S. versus Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, testimony from both sides, many from Trump's inner circle, people that were close to him that sort of flipped and were like, yeah, this guy's actually a fucking psychopath. Documented tweets and communications from Donald Trump. And as of today, with all the kicking and whining and screaming from Donald Trump and his party about the sources I'm about to present and the information I'm about to go through, there's been no meaningful rebuttal to any of this. There's not been another side presented of, no, these were actually the text that I sent, or these were the tweets, or no, I didn't say this, I didn't say that, or, Trump hasn't come forward and said, no, this is actually what I said on January 6th. There's been no meaningful alternative narrative to push through when it deals with these particular sources. And I think that's important to think about. So without further ado, let's start going through a lot of this shit. Take a quick sip for democracy. Come on. So this, the first part I want to go through is evidence that Trump knew he lost the election from the beginning, for even the night of, when people point to the fact that there were so many states that were Trump up until the middle of the night, and then it just drastically switched to Biden back in 2020. Like, even Trump watching that knew exactly what was going to happen. It was being told by his staff that this was going to be a probable outcome, that he would lose the election late because of mail-in ballots, and that mail-in ballots would be mostly Democratic because Trump just spent the last year campaigning on the fact that mail-in ballots are a sham and that Republicans or Trump voters shouldn't use mail-in ballots. They're not to be trusted. So that's why it's mostly Democratic. It wasn't a surprise. People in Trump's team were telling him this constantly, that this is probably what's going to happen. Bernie Sanders was on TV the night before the election saying, yeah, it's probably going to look like, don't be worried. It's going to look like Trump's in the lead. But then once the mail-in ballots are counted, because those are the ones that are counted last, it's going to start turning in favor of Biden because the mail-in ballots are mostly Democratic. So this is from the January 6th report. It says, on election night 2020, the election returns were reported almost in exactly the way that Stepien, who's Trump's campaign manager, and other Trump campaign experts predicted, with the counting of mail-in and absentee ballots gradually diminishing President Trump's perceived lead. As the evening progressed, President Trump called in his campaign team to discuss the results. Stepien and other campaign experts advised him that the results of the election would not be known for some time, and that he could not truthfully declare victory. It was far too early to be making any calls like that. Ballots were still being counted. Ballots were still going to be counted for days. The ongoing counting of ballots, Trump wanted to declare victory before there was any sort of conclusive mark that he would actually be the victor for the 2020 election, which, as he knows, that was not the trend that Trump and his team were prepared to happen. They were prepared for him to lose late. Campaign senior advisor Jason Miller told the select committee that he argued against declaring victory at that time as well because, quote, it was too early to say one way or the other who had won. Stepien advised Trump to say that, quote, the votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell, too early to call the race. But, we are proud of the race we ran, and, think that we're in a good position. And we would say more in the coming days. President Trump refused and instead said this in his public remarks that evening, quote, this is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to the country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We want all voting to stop. And the morning of November 5th, Trump tweeted, quote, stop the count. He halted the counting of the votes at that point, which would have been in violation of both state and federal laws. So on one hand, I do respect the tenacity of the lie, the willingness to commit to it, almost in a theatrical sense, like an actor that embodies someone so fully that they lose themselves in the role, like Heath Ledger as the Joker. Like, Heath Ledger was gone, and I'm not calling Heath Ledger a liar, but like there is an essence of like Heath Ledger was not present there. Heath Ledger was just like fucking, and he just became the Joker. And it was an unbelievable performance. Trump is that way, except Trump is the lie. He's like living as the lie, and the truth of him doesn't exist. The truth of Trump is whatever he needs it to be. So he's sort of like a walking Joker, ready to morph into the chameleon of the lie that suits the moment. Whereas a normal person I don't think would be able to commit to it that fully and that belligerently, that boldly. And it is in a sick, twisted way. It is kind of inspiring the way he was able to commit. The report goes on and says, according to the testimony received by the Select Committee, the only advisor present who supported Donald Trump's inclination to declare victory over the only advisor present who supported President Trump's inclination to declare victory was Rudolph Giuliani, who appeared to be inebriated. I love that detail in the January 6th report. It's like Rudy Giuliani was there, lit as fuck on election night. Trump's looking around to his advisory team. He's saying, you think we could pull this out, right? We should declare victory right now. And his team's like, no, we're not even close. Like the ballots there's hundreds of thousands that need to be counted. That's a terrible idea. And Trump's going to the next advisor. He's like, we should declare victory right now, right? Like, this is going to be the greatest win of all time. And he's like, no, not at all. That would be the worst mistake you could make right now. And then Rudy Giuliani is just sitting there. He's fucking throwing back an old fashioned. He's just like, hold up. I think we should fucking call this thing right now. You know what I'm saying, Donald? Come on, Donald. Okay. You know what I'm saying. Who's got a cigarette? My name's Rudolph Giuliani. And by golly, I think we should call this bitch in 2 seconds. That's what I'm saying. 2 T's in 2 seconds. You cross that T, you make it a Trump. We in the White House. You cross that white and you put that T and bam, you got a white in the White House. And that his name is Donald Trump. And everyone else, and by the way, that was the worst. I don't know what, Rudy Giuliani doesn't sound like that. Let me just say that. But in the moment, I was like, let me be an old-timey, sort of homoerotic dude who's lit smoking a cigarette. But in that moment, Rudy Giuliani was that guy. He was like, you don't listen to me, Donald. We gonna listen. We gonna win this thing together. You got to declare the election right now. You know what I'm saying? And the rest of the team is like, who is this? The former mayor who let Rudy Giuliani in to election night? This is insane. He is not wearing pants. He's literally not wearing pants, smoking a cigarette, drinking an old fashioned, sitting in a throne chair, listening to Kanye West, bumping Kanye West, telling Trump, we want it. That's the visual I have in my head of Rudy Giuliani that night, just fucking lit, bumping Kanye, just ripping darts. Fucking declare the election right now, Trump. He's looking right in Trump's eyes. He's like, fucking do that shit, bitch. Come on, you know it. Fucking right now. According to testimony, but it's so weird to like go off on a bit or whatever you want to call it, and then like go back to reading the January 6th committee report, like the official report. But that's the type of podcast this is. Like I said, I'm a dumb piece of shit. I'm going through the, quote unquote evidence research, and this is what it says. So I'm going to have fun with that. According to the testimony received by the Select Committee, the only advisor present who supported President Trump's inclination to declare victory was Rudolph Giuliani, who appeared to be inebriated. President Trump's attorney, William Barr, who had earlier left election night gathering, perceived the president's statement this way. This is William Barr talking. Right out of the box on election night, the president claimed that there was major fraud underway. I mean, this happened, as far as I could tell, before there was actually any potential looking at evidence. He claimed there was major fraud. And it seemed to be based on the dynamic that at the end of the evening, a lot of Democratic votes came in, which changed the vote counts in certain states, and that seemed to be the basis for this broad claim that there was major fraud. And I didn't think much of that because people had been talking for weeks, and everyone understood for weeks that this was going to be what happened on election night. Giuliani's poisoning me. No, I'm fine. He's poisoning me for that, for me impersonating him, his character. No, Giuliani can't afford to hire someone to poison me because he, as we'll get into, later in the podcast. He's now bankrupt for a defamation, but we'll get into that. So yeah, people on both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats, commentators on both sides of the aisle were saying that Trump was going to be the early lead and that these mail-in ballots, which were going to be mostly Democratic, because to Trump's detriment, he went on campaigning that he would go to rallies and tell his voters, don't do mail-in ballots, rather than saying, hey, do mail-in ballots, and also let's tighten up the mail-in ballot system. Trump not once advocated for tightening up the mail-in ballot system. He just told his voters to just, fuck that, go to the polls. So Trump actually hurt himself in that sense, where he didn't get the benefit of Republicans who weren't going to vote if it wasn't in person. They're a lot of older people, sick people that, maybe they couldn't take off that day. They were like, yeah, if Trump told me not to do mail-in ballots, so I'm just not going to vote if I can't get to the polls. Trump would have had all of those votes if he just told his people that, they could do a mail-in ballot. These are examples in the January 6th report of things that Trump was told directly on record, and what Trump said to either his voters or to, Fox News or whoever later that week or after he was told certain information. So then Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen on December 15th, 2020, this is a conversation he had with Trump. And Jeffrey Rosen is speaking, and he's saying, and so he said, well, what about this? Oh, no, sorry, that's Trump speaking. Trump saying to Jeffrey Rosen, and so he said, well, what about this? I saw it on videotape, somebody delivering a suitcase of ballots. And we said, Jeffrey Rosen speaking now, it wasn't a suitcase, it was a bin. That's what they use when they're counting ballots. It's benign. And so there was a whole case in Georgia where... So I'm very phlegmy right now for some reason. It's probably coughing it up. That Giuliani poison's getting to me. So there was a whole case in Georgia where, what was it? One American News, I forget exact, OAN, I think it was, edited a very long video. It was like hours long of ballots being transferred and handled in, I think it was State Farm Arena in Georgia, these ballots being counted. And the original video was hours long, and it shows that people were told to go home for election night. Then there was a call saying, no, come back. We still need to count ballots. And so ballots were brought in ballot boxes, not suitcases. They were like these plastic containers that carry ballots. And then people continued counting. And when you watch the full video, you see exactly what happens. One American News edited down this to like a 2-minute thing, put it out on Twitter. Trump supported it. Giuliani retweeted it. So many people were like, look, this ballot suitcase comes out of nowhere. And you just see like people pulling out a suitcase of ballots underneath the table, and people are coming out with all types of conspiracies, saying, where did those ballots come from? People were hiding them. They were brought in. What's going on with like all these shredders and like a ton of shit. But if you watch the full video, which, is out there, you can go watch it for yourself. You clearly see what happens there. Everyone who's watched this video on both sides, Democrat, Republican, who's not Trump and his crazy like inner circle, even a lot of his inner circle has come out and said like, yeah, there's no fraud here. This is normal ballot operations. Sometimes the election workers get sent home, and then there's, they're called back, and then they have to keep counting. Election night is fucking wild. Shit happens, but nothing out of the ordinary happened in the full video. Then the Georgia video is edited down, and that's what Trump is referring to here in this quote, where he says, I saw it on videotape, somebody delivering a suitcase of ballots. And we said, Jeffrey Rosen, Attorney General, said it wasn't a suitcase. It was a bin. That's what they use when they're counting ballots. It's benign. And Trump and his team actually had the full video. The full video was sent to Trump and his team even before the edited video was retweeted by Trump and Giuliani. Like, they had the full video. They knew exactly what happened. So Trump is sort of like playing with Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen here, where he says, and I don't know Trump's mental state. So in my opinion, he's playing with Attorney Jeffrey Rosen, where he's trying to like get him to bite and say like, well, what's up with these? What's up with the videotape? What's up with the suitcase of ballots? And Jeffrey Rosen's like, that's a ballot bin. That's literally what they used to count the ballots. There's nothing suspicious here. President Trump, 1 week later, on December 22nd, 2020, says, quote, there is even security camera footage from Georgia that shows officials telling poll watchers to leave the room before pulling suitcases of ballots out from under the tables and continuing the count for hours. That is not what happens. Again, there's a longer video. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue on December 27th and December 31st, 2020 says, quote, I told the president myself that several times in several conversations that these allegations about ballots being smuggled in a suitcase and run through the machine several times, it was not true. That we looked at it. We looked at the video. We interviewed the witnesses, that it was not true. I believe it was in the phone call on December 27th. It was also in a meeting in the Oval Office on December 31st. Then President Trump later that week on January 2nd, 2021 says, quote, she stuffed the machine. She stuffed the ballot. Each ballot went through 3 times. They were showing, here's the ballot number 1. Here's the second time. Here's the third time. Next ballot. This did not happen. If you go back and watch the video, there's no ballot being counted 1 time, 2 time, 3 time. You could go back, watch the full thing. It's like one of those things where if you cut out 2 hours and 58 minutes of footage and then you put together 2 minutes of footage and you chop it at different segments, you could make anything look dumb. You could make anything look suspicious. You could edit this podcast down that I'm recording right now and make it say, I love Hitler. And I just said it. So all you have to do is cut out that part and be like, look, this is what the host of the Zach Show thinks about, World War II era German leader Adolf Hitler. And then boom, you have your video. You can make almost anything look like anything you want when you remove 98% of the context. And Trump knows all of this. He's being told by people, both high-ranking officials like attorney generals and people in his inner circle, that, there's nothing suspicious. So Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger says to Trump on January 2nd, 2021, you're talking about the State Farm video, and I think that's extremely unfortunate that Rudy Giuliani or his people, they sliced and diced that video and took it out of context. We did an audit of that, and we proved conclusively that they were not scanned 3 times. Yes, Mr. President, we'll send you the link from WSB. Trump, I don't care about a link. I don't need it. Trump says to Raffensperger's face, who's in charge of the investigation, Secretary of State of Georgia, I don't care about a link. I don't need it. Trump actually has this. Him and his team already have the full video. So Trump knows exactly what's going on. His team knows exactly what's going on. They're just choosing to ignore the truth. Trump's fully embodying the Joker in this moment. He's choosing to embrace the lie that suits him. President Trump, 1 day later, after Brad Raffensperger tells him, the edited video is bullshit, we'll send you the full one, which they already have. Trump says, quote, I spoke to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger yesterday about Fulton County and voter fraud in Georgia. He was unwilling or unable to answer questions such as the, quote, ballots under the table scam, ballot destruction, out-of-state voters, dead voters, and more. He has no clue. None of these claims have held up in court. As we'll get into, Trump filed like 64 different court cases. A ton of them were rejected from the courts without standing. A ton just didn't have evidence. He had one win on a procedural issue that was insignificant in the voting process. But like none of these accusations have a single shred of evidence to back things up from Trump or his team. And then one last one. Georgia Secretary of State General Counsel Ryan Germany on January 2nd, 2021 says Trump. This is Trump saying to Germany, Secretary of State. Trump says, "You had out-of-state voters. They voted in Georgia, but they were from out of state. 4,925 people were out of state." Germany says to Trump, "Everyone we've been through are people that lived in Georgia, moved to a different state, but then moved back to Georgia legitimately. They moved back years ago. This was not like something just before the election. So there's nothing there's something about the data that it's just not accurate." So Germany's telling Trump, like, these aren't dead voters. They're not people that drove in from out of state to vote in Georgia. Like, they, like me, I once lived in New York. Then I moved to Georgia. Then I moved to Virginia. Lived in Virginia. Then I moved back to New York, and I can vote in New York. I'm still registered in New York. I am going to vote in New York, either later today or tomorrow. But that was it. And then Trump, 4 days later, after General Counsel Ryan Germany tells him, yeah, these aren't illegitimate voters, he says, President Trump says, quote, "And at least 15,000 ballots were cast by individuals who moved out of the state prior to the November 3rd election. They said they moved right back." So again, just bullshit without any evidence. Trump is told in the clearest terms that he lost. On December 14th, 2020, the Electoral College met to cast and certify each state's electoral votes. By this time, many of President Trump's senior staff and certain members of his family were urging him to concede that he had lost. Labor Secretary Gene Scalia told the committee that he called President Trump around this time and gave him such feedback quite directly. Quote, "So, I had put in a call to the president. I might have called on the 13th. We spoke, I believe, on the 14th, in which I conveyed to him that I thought that it was time for him to acknowledge that President Biden had prevailed in the election. But I communicated to the president that when the legal process is exhausted, excuse me, and when the president electors have voted, that's the point at which the outcome needs to be expected. And I told him that I did believe, yes, that once those legal processes were run, if fraud had not been established that had affected the outcome of the election, that unfortunately I believed that what had to be done was concede the outcome." At this point, Trump has been told by nearly everyone in his inner circle, the high-ranking officials in the DOJ, labor secretary, whoever, that you lost the election. There's zero evidence for any of these cases. Trump's crank lawyers know there's not shit behind these cases, because when you submit 64 cases and then 63 of them get dismissed almost immediately, the lawyers are not surprised. They're like, yeah, we knew these cases were bullshit, but we're just trying to delay the certification of the election, which is what we're going to get into when January 6th rolls around. But yeah, imagine everyone in your family is telling you that your girlfriend is toxic. Your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, uncles, all of your best friends are saying your girlfriend's toxic. She's a piece of shit. I saw her cheating on you. She's slutting it up on Snapchat. I subscribe to her OnlyFans, and you're just like, she doesn't have an OnlyFans, and your brother's like, yeah, she does. It's right here. All your friends are subscribed too, and she hasn't told you. She has 19 boyfriends. She's lying to you. For you to then have all that evidence and turn around and say, no, I'm going to marry this girl. You have to be so deeply in denial. And let me rephrase that. I accept the denial for like a day, maybe a week, because denial is powerful. You can convince yourself of almost anything in denial. But beyond a week, where you're still like, yeah, I won the election and there's evidence to prove that, or my girlfriend's not a slut, even though I was sent the link where she has 35,000 OnlyFans subscribers and lied to me about it and has banged half of my friends, and they're showing me, they're sending videos of them banging my girlfriend, and I'm like, yeah, that must be deep fakes, no way that's real. And it's like they're holding the day's newspaper in front of the camera as they're just like fucking plowing out this dude's girlfriend. After a week, that's a mental illness. Like that's delusion. That is just like deep withdrawal and dissociation from reality. And whichever one you want to pick, whether you think Trump is just a bold-faced liar and doesn't give a shit and is borderline, sociopathic in the sense that lying doesn't bother him, which is more in the camp that I lean, or that when Trump was presented with all of this evidence by his inner circle and by people on both sides of the aisle and by high-ranking officials in government and was in deep denial, either way, he's unfit to be the president. If you have someone who's like willing to do, and we still haven't gotten into all this shit, like this is just the tip of the iceberg, but like whether he's a sociopath or whether he's a, just like deeply mentally ill and dissociated from reality, neither one is great. They're good for entertainment purposes. It's good for keeping your attention, but it's not good for running a country. So Trump uses pressure to try to get the Department of Justice to overturn the election. Let's get into this. So Trump tries to pressure the DOJ to overturn the election. And this is after the results have come in. This is after election night. And the wheels start to turn in Trump's mind. So the Justice Department gives it straight to Donald Trump. In addition, multiple high-ranking Justice Department personnel appointed by President Trump also informed him repeatedly that allegations were false. So like the fraud allegations of the election, that like these voter fraud things were false. They repeatedly told him, high-ranking Justice Department personnel. Trump knew this. As January 6th drew closer, Acting Attorney General Rosen and Acting Attorney General Donahue had calls with President Trump on almost a daily basis, explaining in detail what the department's investigation showed. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue told the Select Committee that he and the Acting Attorney General, General Rosen, tried to put it in very clear terms to the president. And I said something to the effect of, "Sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed. We've looked into Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada. These are the, part of the 7 states that Trump launched these dozens of, lawsuits with no basis that were basically immediately dismissed. We're doing our job." On December 31st, Donahue recalls telling the president that, quote, "People keep telling you these things and they turn out not to be true." He's talking about people in Trump's inner camp planting the seeds of election fraud. And then on January 3rd, Donahue reiterated this point with the president. As in previous conversations, we would say to him, quote, "We check that out and there's nothing to it." Acting Attorney General Rosen testified before the Select Committee that the, quote, "common element of all of this communication with Donald Trump was President Trump urging the department to find widespread fraud that did not actually exist. None of the department's investigations identified any genuine fraud sufficient to the impact of the election outcome." Rosen says, quote, "During my tenure as acting attorney general, which began on December 24th of 2020, the Department of Justice maintained the position publicly announced by former Attorney General William Barr that the department had been presented with no evidence of widespread voter fraud in a scale sufficient to change the outcome of the 2020 election. A top advisor warned about the efforts to overturn the election quite clearly, a top advisor warned about the efforts to overturn the election quite clearly, said, quote, "I'll obviously hustle to help on all fronts, but it's tough to own any of this when it's all just conspiracy shit beamed down from the mothership. An unnamed senior campaign advisor wrote in an email on December 8th, 2020, referring to, quote, Trump's elite strike task force led by Rudy Giuliani, the team of bumbling fucking sociopathic lawyers called the Elite Strike Task Force, run by now liar bankrupt Rudy Giuliani. So yeah, literally someone on the team responsible for finding election fraud is like, I'll try to help with whatever I can, but it's tough when this is just conspiracy shit beamed down from the mothership, beamed down from Trump. As a result of this, Donald Trump threatens to replace Jeffrey Rosen as acting attorney general. Following his loss in the 2020 election, former President Donald Trump attempted to use the power of the U.S. Department of Justice to challenge and overturn the election results. His approach involved pressuring senior DOJ officials to investigate and substantiate claims of widespread voter fraud, despite a lack of credible evidence. These attempts to politicize the DOJ were part of a broader strategy to cast doubt on the election's legitimacy and seek avenues to remain in power. One key example of Trump's efforts was his engagements with Jeffrey Rosen, who served as acting attorney general after the resignation of William Barr. Trump reportedly pressured Rosen and other DOJ officials to declare the election quote-unquote corrupt and lend credibility to his unfounded claims of election fraud. Trump's actions included urging Rosen to support claims that certain states had seen voting irregularities, suggesting that the DOJ make public statements backing these allegations. Rosen, however, resisted, stating that the department could not only act based on evidence, which the DOJ consistently found lacking. A particularly notable figure in these efforts was Jeffrey Clark, a relatively low-profile DOJ official who oversaw environmental enforcement. Clark emerged as a proponent of Trump's election claims and was reportedly willing to support Trump's effort to investigate fraud. Clark proposed sending a letter to officials in Georgia and other swing states, urging them to convene special legislative sessions to reconsider their certified election results. This draft letter, however, was never sent, as Rosen and others in the department opposed it and viewed it as an overreach of DOJ authority. The tension between Rosen and Clark culminated in a heated meeting at the White House on January 3rd, 2021. Trump reportedly considered replacing Rosen with Clark to advance the DOJ's investigation into election fraud. However, after learning that the DOJ officials and even the White House legal counsel would resign en masse if Rosen was removed, Trump backed down, effectively halting Clark's ascent. The standoff underscored the lengths to which Trump was willing to go, as well as the resistance he faced within the DOJ. So Trump essentially was like, all right, listen, he's calling over Jeffrey Rosen, the acting attorney general. He's like, listen, I'm going to need you to sign this letter that's going to the state of Georgia saying we need to investigate election fraud. And Rosen's like, there's been no evidence of election fraud. I'm not signing that. And Trump's like, are you sure? I'm thinking about replacing you. And Rosen's like, all right, say it to my face. And then Trump goes behind Rosen's back, essentially offers Jeffrey Clark, this low-profile DOJ official, Rosen's job. It is like, hey, if you're willing to be more of a piece of shit than Rosen and you sign this letter, I'll make you acting attorney general. And then Jeffrey Clark apparently was like, yeah, I'll be your little bitch, Trump. I'll fucking sign whatever. Sign my lower back and fucking come on it, Trump, if you want to. I'm daddy's girl. Fucking just eat my asshole out like you've eaten democracy out of this country over the last 4 years. And Clark was willing to do that. And Trump was like, okay, I guess we got to go ahead with this plan. Trump is like, all right, I'm going to replace Clark. I guess starts to put Trump's like, all right, I'm going to start to replace Rosen, the acting attorney general, puts the wheels in motion, and he's going to replace him with Jeffrey Clark, who's willing to sign this fraudulent letter and send it to Georgia on behalf of the DOJ. And then when the rest of the DOJ gets word of it, they're like, no, fuck that. Trump's a piece of shit. We're not going to support this. If you fire Rosen, we're all going to resign. And then Trump's like, all right, whatever. Fuck it. I'll back down. But in my mind, Jeffrey Rosen is one of the heroes in this story that did not back down to Trump's commands. Because if he was like, yeah, I'll sign a fraudulent letter and send it to Georgia and say that we found evidence of election fraud when we didn't on behalf of the DOJ, the situation might be looking pretty differently, because people forget that, yes, institutions are the things that hold this country together, but institutions are made of people. So when people bend to power fraudulently and they're willing to commit schemes of fraud, that those are our institutions, and that's how institutions bend, and they become corrupt and they become rotten. And I'm not saying that the United States institutions are perfect. They are far fucking from it. But there are people like Jeffrey Rosen, apparently the Attorney General, that were not willing to bow to Trump, and even threats that he would be replaced as the Attorney General, to be coerced into signing a fraudulent letter and sending it to Georgia officials. So, yeah, fuck yeah, Jeffrey Rosen. Let's get into January 6th. And there is a ton on what happened on January 6th in the January 6th report, on Trump's own Twitter account, on what he said to officials. January 6th is actually documented so well that it's so surprising. It's flabbergasting that this is not being talked about more. Like the shit that happened on January 6th between Trump and not Hunter Biden, Mike Pence. I was about to say Hunter Pence. Hunter Biden was he was having a good time somewhere else on January 6th. He was fucking smoking it up, having his own insurrection of the soul through crack. And Hunter Biden knocked on this door right now, is like, we're going to go see God through this crack pipe. I'd say, fuck yeah, Hunter, take me to God. Show me Jesus Christ. Show me the Trinity through this pipe. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happened on January 6th with Trump, with Mike Pence hiding in a bunker with his family, Trump's tweets in real time as he's being told by officials what's happening at the Capitol, like a whole ton of shit. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll get back into the Trump intentionally inciting a violent insurrection on January 6th. So yeah, we'll be right back. And we're back. Trump intentionally inciting a violent insurrection on January 6th. Let's get into the Capitol riot buildup. So in the early morning hours of December 19th, shortly after the contentious December 18th White House meeting with Sidney Powell and others, Donald Trump sent a tweet urging his supporters to travel to Washington for January 6th. In that tweet, President Trump attached false allegations that the election was stolen and promised a, quote, wild time on January 6th. This Twitter invitation was followed by over a dozen other instances in which he used Twitter to encourage supporters to rally for him in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. So yeah, at this point, everyone close, or nearly everyone close to Trump, has told him that the election allegations are bullshit. They've been presented with mountains of evidence. They're being told by DOJ officials that the evidence is not there. Many of these people, Republicans who want to see a Republican in office, who I'm sure would love the election to be reversed and for Donald Trump to be president as a Republican. Many of these Republicans are telling him, yeah, dude, there's nothing fucking there. Why are you pursuing this election fraud? And then Donald Trump tweets out that the election was stolen and promised a quote unquote wild time on January 6th. And then dozens of other organizations that were pro-Trump went to the Capitol to protest. Many of these people armed and, ready to get wild. And as a content creator, I actually feel in the middle about this because I don't believe in holding people responsible for the actions of their followers. That if I say something like, if I say on a podcast that, I went to a pizza place in Brooklyn and I hated that pizza place, and then one of my listeners goes to that Brooklyn pizza shop and robs it at gunpoint and is like, the Zach Show says hello, and just, fucking takes their money and runs. I don't believe I should be responsible for that because I didn't tell listeners on my podcast to go rob the pizza shop. All I just said is I didn't really like it. But I'm also not the president of the United States. So when I am constantly spewing on Twitter to hundreds of millions of followers who want to see me put back in office that the election was stolen, stop the steal, things are going to get wild on election night, you're getting very close to the line of saying everything about what you can say without saying the unspeakable, which is storm the Capitol and interfere with the election certification. You're getting up to about the edge when you tell your followers to get wild at the Capitol. What do you think that means? Is this like a Girls Gone Wild video? Is Trump gonna, whip his titties out and mud wrestle a fucking Miss Alaska in the mud pit at the Capitol riots, and everyone's gonna like cheer him on, like, yeah, Girls Gone Wild, look at those muddy titties, come on. Like, is that what Trump's talking about? That would be sweet for sure. That would have been a different type of insurrection. Fucking insurrect that pussy. But Trump is talking about, allegedly was talking about something else. Getting wild in a different way. So hours before the Ellipse rally on January 6th, which was another place that Trump spoke, the fact that the crowd assembled was prepared for potential violence was widely known. In addition to intelligence reports indicating potential violence at the Capitol, weapons and other prohibited items were being seized by police on the streets and by Secret Service at the magnetometers for the Ellipse speech. Secret Service confiscated a haul of weapons from 28,000 spectators who did pass through the magnetometers. 242 canisters of pepper spray, 269 knives or blades, 18 brass knuckles, 18 tasers, 6 pieces of body armor, 3 gas masks, 30 batons, blunt instruments, and 17 miscellaneous items like scissors, needles, or screwdrivers. And thousands of others purposely remained outside the magnetometers or left their packs outside. Others brought firearms. This is on January 6th at the Capitol. Others brought firearms. 3 men in fatigues from Broward County, Florida, brandished AR-15s in front of the Metropolitan Police officers on 14th Street and Independence Avenue on the morning of January 6th. MPD advised over the radio that one individual was possibly armed with a Glock at 14th and Constitution Avenue, and another was possibly armed with a rifle at 15th and Constitution Avenue around 11:23 a.m. The National Park Service detained an individual with a rifle between 12 and 1 p.m. Almost all of this was known before Donald Trump took the stage at Ellipse. So yeah, there was this situation where the Trump rally at the Capitol, they're the magnetometers set up to enter the rally. And some people did, a lot of people did go through the magnetometer and things got confiscated that I just read through. But a lot of people didn't go through the magnetometers and they just kind of stayed on the perimeter of the rally and watched the speeches. And Secret Service was spotting people with weapons beyond the magnetometer, and they put together that, yeah, those people aren't coming through the magnetometers because they likely have weapons on them. Hundreds, possibly thousands of people with weapons. And they said this to Trump multiple times, saying, yeah, there's people with weapons. That's probably why they're outside the magnetometer. And Trump, at a certain point, was was very adamant about marching to the Capitol with these people. He wanted to lead the march down to the Capitol, and Secret Service says, no, we cannot guarantee protection for you because all the people outside the magnetometer will be joining and they likely have weapons. We could see them. People are brandishing firearms, knives, fucking whatever. They've already confiscated hundreds of weapons within the magnetometers. They're telling this to Trump, that people are armed at the Capitol. By the time President Trump was preparing to give his speech, he and his advisors knew enough to cancel the rally. And he certainly knew enough to cancel any plans for a march to the Capitol. According to testimony obtained by the Select Committee, President Trump knew that the elements of the crowd were armed and had prohibited items. He knew about this. And many thousands of people would not pass through the magnetometers for that reason. Testimony indicates that the president had received an earlier security briefing, and testimony indicates that the Secret Service mentioned the prohibited items again as they drove President Trump to the Ellipse, which was the rally after the Capitol. The Secret Service special agent who drove the president after his speech at the Capitol told the Select Committee that Trump made a similar remark in the vehicle when his demand to go to the Capitol was refused. Essentially, that Trump did not believe his supporters posed a security risk to him as a person, an ally. Minutes after the exchange that Hutchinson described, another phlegm ball. Minutes after when you talk for a while, the saliva builds up. You're not swallowing in regular amounts. It can get, a little drippy in the throat. And that's just the reality of being a podcaster. It's a hard life. Minutes after the exchange that Hutchinson described, when President Trump took the stage, he pointedly expressed his concern about the thousands of attendees who would not enter the rally area and instructed Secret Service to allow that part of the crowd to enter anyway. So Trump, he knows many of these people are most likely armed, and he's like, no, fucking let them through. According to the testimony from Hutchinson and the Secret Service, Trump said, quote, I'd love to have those tens of thousands of people allowed. The military, the Secret Service, and we want to thank you and the police, law enforcement. Great, you're doing a great job. But I'd love if they could be allowed to come up here with us. Is that possible? Can you just let them in? Can you just let them come up, please? So Trump sees all these people. The Secret Service is telling him they're armed. They're not coming through the magnetometers. And Trump is like, no, let them in. They're not going to, they just have AR-15s. They're going to shoot them off into the sky. When I say something good, instead of clapping, they're just going to fire them off into heaven. That's all they're going to do. It's like applause laughter. It's, it's armed laughter. That's what it is. It's a desk pop. You saw that movie with Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell, the desk pop. They're sky popping. That's what people do at Trump rallies. They sky pop for approval. And the Secret Service is like, yeah, no, we're not letting these people in. Although President Trump and his advisors knew the risk of violence and specifically knew that the elements of the crowd were angry and some were armed from intelligence and law enforcement reports that morning, President Trump nevertheless went forward with the rally and then specifically instructed the crowd to march to the Capitol, knowing these people are armed. That's why I'm saying he specifically incited a violent insurrection. He knew that this would be a likely thing to happen. If you have hundreds to thousands of people who are armed and angry and think that the election was stolen to them because you've been force-feeding them bullshit over Twitter for the past 2.5 months that, yes, the election was stolen with absolutely no proof, what do you think these people have weapons for? They're not just going to stand around. They're not just going to dilly-dally on the lawn of the Capitol and have a picnic. They're going to get wild, like you literally told them to. So that is why I'm saying that he incited a violent insurrection. That all of the things, it's not just one tweet or one action. It's the web of actions and speech that Trump weaved together before and on January 6th that incited the crowd of people, the mob, the Trump supporters, MAGA supporters, whatever, that Trump had spun around his finger to go towards the Capitol, to have the rally, knowing they're armed, knowing they're angry, telling them that it's going to be wild, telling them they have to take back their country. What the fuck did he think was going to happen? I think we knew exactly what he thought was going to happen. Although President Trump and his advisors knew the risk of violence and knew specifically the elements of the crowd were angry and some were armed, from intelligence and law enforcement reports that morning, President went forward with the rally and specifically instructed the crowd to march to the Capitol. He says, quote, "Because you'll never have to take back our country with weakness." Or, quote, "Because you'll never take back our country with weakness." This is Trump saying this in his speech to these people, many of whom are armed. Quote, "Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated." Lawfully slated. And we're going to get into the elector fraud scheme with Mike Pence, his pressure on Mike Pence. But that is what Trump is talking about with that. President Trump's speech to the crowd that day lasted more than an hour. The speech walked through dozens of known falsehoods of purported election fraud, and Trump again made false and malicious claims about Dominion voting systems. Dominion voting system, it was like there's a whole lawsuit with Fox where Tucker Carlson and people on Fox News were saying that, the Dominion voting system was rigged and that had ties to Venezuela and like all this fraud. None of it ended up being true. Fox knew this was so, but they kept reporting it, which is why they had to pay a shit ton of money to Dominion. But that's what Trump is talking about. As discussed earlier, Trump again pressured Mike Pence to refuse to count the lawful electoral votes, going off script repeatedly and leading the crowd to falsely believe that Pence could and would alter the election outcome. Trump says, quote, "And I just spoke to Mike. I said, Mike, that doesn't take courage. What takes courage is to do nothing. That takes courage. And then we're stuck with a president who lost the election by a lot, and we have to live with that for 4 more years. We're not just going to let that happen. When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. So I hope Mike has the courage to do what he has to do. And I hope he doesn't listen to the rhinos, the Republicans, and the stupid people that he's listening to." So again, we will get into the whole Trump fake electors scheme with Mike Pence. But this is Trump, long story short, is pressuring Mike Pence to, instead of certifying the correct votes for Biden from certain states, he's essentially pressuring Mike Pence into accepting a false set of electoral votes that would make Trump president. That these votes have no backing, they are false, they are fraudulent, and he's telling Pence, like, no, accept these instead, because the VP is the one who presides over the certification of the election. He is the honorary presider of that, and so Trump's telling people and telling the crowd, like, Mike Pence, this is your job, this is your responsibility, do the right thing. And Trump wants the right thing is to accept these fake electoral slates. So the Capitol is now under siege. By 1:25 p.m., President Trump was informed that the Capitol was under attack. Minutes after arriving back at the White House, the president ran into a member of the White House staff and asked if they had watched his speech on television. Quote, "Sir, they cut it off because they're rioting down at the Capitol," the employee said. The president asked what they meant by that. Quote, "They're rioting down at the Capitol." I love how Trump's like, "What do you mean by that?" His advisor, the advisor's like, "Yeah, they're rioting down at the Capitol, sir." "Oh, what do you mean by that? What's a riot, you say?" And then the guy's like, "Yeah, they're rioting down at the Capitol," the employee said. He repeats himself. "They're rioting down at the Capitol, Mr. President." "Oh, really?" the president asks. "All right, let's go see." Like almost like Julius Caesar, just like sitting on his throne watching the gladiators. Like, "Oh, really? You say there's carnage down at the Capitol? Let's go observe. Bring me my faithful servant. Let's go see." A photograph taken by a White House photographer, the last one permitted until later that day, captures the moment that the president was made aware of the violent uprising at the Capitol. At 2:24 p.m., knowing the riot was underway and that Vice President Pence was at the Capitol, President Trump sent this tweet. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what he should have done to protect our country. Again, certify these fake elector slates. And our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones, which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. Evidence shows that the 2:24 p.m. tweet immediately precipitated the further violence at the Capitol. Immediately after this tweet, the crowds both inside and outside of the Capitol building violently surged forward. People at the Capitol are plugged in to Donald Trump's Twitter. You can clearly see ebbs and flows based on the wildness, the rowdiness of the Capitol riots based on what Donald Trump is tweeting. When he says something, it happens almost instantly. When he says back off, it happens almost instantly. When he says go home, it happens almost. So like they're listening for calls from Donald Trump like their leader, like the crazy guy beaming shit down from the mothership. That is Trump through his Twitter to his loyal followers, his MAGA rioters. So evidence shows that 2:24 p.m., the tweet immediately precipitated further violence at the Capitol. Immediately after this tweet, the crowds both inside and outside of the Capitol building violently surged forward. Outside the building, within 10 minutes, thousands of voters overran the line on the west side of the Capitol that was being held by the Metropolitan Police Force's Civil Disturbance Unit, the first time in the history of DC Metro Police that such a security line had ever been broken. At 2:26 p.m., Vice President Pence was again moved to a different location. So again, President Trump is getting communication with what's going on the Capitol. He's seeing the chaos. He's seeing the attack. He's tuned in on live television. He knows that Mike Pence is inside the Capitol. He's gotten word that people are getting close to Mike Pence, that he's had to be moved multiple times. Trump has this knowledge as he is tweeting about Mike Pence, saying do the right thing. And also, tweeting, basically pressuring Pence, saying you need to do this. The people rioting at the Capitol that are, they're connected to Trump through the fucking the matrix of his Twitter. They know who Mike Pence is, and they're coming for him. So at 2:26 p.m., Vice President Mike Pence was again moved to a different location. President Trump had the TV on in the dining room. At 2:38 p.m., Fox News was showing a video clip of the chaos and attack with tear gas filling the air in the Capitol Rotunda. And a newscaster reported, this is a very dangerous situation. This is the context in which Trump sent the tweet. Testimony obtained by the committee indicates that President Trump knew about the rioters' anger at Vice President Pence and indicated something to the effect that the vice president, quote unquote, deserves it. As Cassidy Hutchinson explained, quote, I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for Vice President to be fucking hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. Talking about Trump, saying he thinks Mike Pence deserves it for not going along with the fake elector scheme. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is fucking crazy. We need to be doing something more. Briefly stepped into Mark's office, and when Mark had said something to the effect of, he doesn't think they're doing anything wrong, knowing what I had heard briefly in the dining room, coupled with Pat discussing the hanging Mike Pence chance in the lobby of our office, and then Mark's response, I understood there, as in like they, to be the rioters in the Capitol that were chanting for the vice president to be hung. So Trump is hearing reports of this. He's seeing the footage on the TV. He's, the chants, hang Mike Pence. People are coming to Trump saying you have to do more. His advisors, a lot of his inner circle saying, you have to call this off. Use your Twitter. Say something more directly about stopping being violent and going home. And Trump's just sitting there watching the TV almost maniacally, like the Joker, just being like, yeah, fucking, let it burn. Let's see what fucking happens. Just like the image of Trump in a lazy boy chair, just legs crossed, sipping whiskey, smoking a cigar in the Oval Office, just watching rioters chant, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. And he turns to one of his advisors and says, they're not doing anything wrong. Them being the rioters. That's the scene that's going on right now. At 2:38 p.m., President Trump sent this tweet. Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. So he tweeted about Mike Pence at 2:24. Then for 14 minutes says nothing. And during this time, Mike Pence is being moved to different locations, under essentially in like a bunker under the Capitol. There's photos of Mike Pence you can look up that show him hiding with his family with Capitol Police under the Capitol, people searching for Mike Pence, people chanting, hang Mike Pence in the Capitol. Trump tweeting that Pence has betrayed the country and that, Pence failed to do the right thing. It's fucking insane right now. Like Mike Pence must have thought there was a decent chance that him and his family could have been killed on January 6th. And then Trump's response to all of that is he says, please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. Which is like a roundabout way of saying, fuck off, essentially. I'm not going to say shit about Mike Pence directly. Support the police. Like a really weird time to say support the police as he sees people on TV barreling through them and taking their riot gear and fucking using it to break open windows. To say to these people that are just like rabid inside the Capitol, like, hey, just remember to back the boys in blue. That's what I'm saying. Stay peaceful. You know what I mean? Weird time to send that message. At 3:13 p.m., President Trump sent another tweet, but again declined to tell people to go home. He says, quote, I am asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. He literally just has to say, stop the violence, go the fuck home, stop, go home, stop, any variation of that. And he refuses. He refuses to say anything of the sort, saying stay peaceful after hours, to 2 hours almost of watching the Capitol violence, stay peaceful. We're the party of law and order and respect. He's been watching this unfold with Mike Pence and his family in danger. Pretty indifferent tweet to the safety of Mike Pence and his family and other people inside the Capitol when you think about the current situation going on. President Trump could have done this. He could have told people to go home at any time after he learned of the violence of the Capitol. At 4:17, 187 minutes after finishing his speech, and even longer after the attack began, President Trump finally broadcast a video message in which he asked those attacking the Capitol to leave. He says, quote, this is Trump talking, I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. So Trump says nothing about, what you guys did was fucked up. I do not support it. I do not condone it. He actually says the opposite. He says we, like he's speaking with the rioters, with the people committing the violent insurrection, which he also has been doing on Twitter before that. And up to that moment, he's saying things like, we had the election stolen. We need to stop the steal. Essentially like drawing people in, like I'm one of you, you're one of me. Let's fucking fight this shit together. Let's get wild at the Capitol. We will do this. He says, I know your pain. I know you're hurt. Almost like sympathizing with the people who became violent at the Capitol. At 6:27 p.m., President Trump retired to his residence for the night. As he did, he had one final comment to an employee who accompanied him to the residence. The one takeaway that the president expressed in that moment followed a horrific afternoon of violence and the worst attack on the U.S. Capitol building in over 2 centuries. He said this as his last statement, quote, Mike Pence let me down. Mike Pence let me down. Reflecting on the president's conduct that day, Vice President Pence noted that President Trump, quote, had made no effort to contact me in the midst of the rioting or any point afterward. He wrote that President Trump's, quote, reckless words had endangered his family and all those serving at the Capitol. So Trump seeing these chants, hang Mike Pence, he's tweeting about Mike Pence, saying that Mike Pence failed the country. He failed to go along with the Elector scheme. He failed to stand up to election fraud, which is false. There was no election fraud, and the Elector scheme was fake electorates that Mike Pence rightfully refused, like we're about to go into. And he knows him and his family are in a bunker under the Capitol at risk of their lives, and he continues to watch the riots for over 3 hours before he tells people to go home, but not before saying, you're hurt and I feel your pain, pretty much saying, you know, essentially like pat on the back, you did your job, go home. And imagine that is the guy who you worked alongside with for 4 fucking years. I could not imagine the anger that Mike Pence had to hold back in the media, where he wanted to just tell Trump to go fuck himself and to suck his dick with all the shit that he did. Absolutely fucking despicable. And on that note of despicability, we will get into Trump's fake elector scheme right after I take a piss. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Trump's fake electors scheme. Now we're really back. Yeah. Here's the general plot of Trump's fake elector scheme. A series of contemporaneous documents demonstrate what President Trump and his allies, including attorney Kenneth Chesebro, were attempting to accomplish. The fake elector scheme was that they anticipated that the president of the Senate, which under the Constitution is the vice president, could rely upon these false slates of electors on January 6th to justify refusing to count genuine electoral votes. So the way that it works in the Electoral College, there's the popular vote. People vote in the state, and then whatever the popular vote is in the state, the Electoral College will then vote for the candidate that was voted for by the state. So New York, if New York votes for Kamala, that's the popular vote. We have 2 Electoral College, or the Electoral College votes for New York State, however many we have, because I don't fucking know. Those go towards Kamala Harris, and then that's the electoral process that these votes get sent in, and then the VP, House, Senate have a joint meeting to oversee the certification of these electoral slates, these electoral votes, according to who won the popular vote in each state. So they anticipated, Trump and his allies, that the president of the Senate, Mike Pence, could rely upon these false slates of electors on January 6th to justify refusing to count genuine electoral votes. The false slates were created by fake Republican electors on December 14th. At the same time, the actual certified electors in those states were meeting to cast their state's electoral college votes for President Biden. By that point in time, election-related litigation was over in nearly all of the subject states, and Trump campaign election lawyers realized that the fake slates could not be lawful or justifiable on any grounds. Justin Clark, the Trump campaign deputy manager and senior counsel, told the select committee that, quote, he had real problems with the process. Clark warned his colleagues, quote, unless we have litigation pending in these states, I don't think this is appropriate, or, this isn't the right thing to do. I don't remember how I phrased it, but I got into a little bit of back and forth, and I think it was with Ken Chesebro where I said, all right, you just gotta get after it. Like, I'm out. This person essentially rescinding themselves from the process. Despite the fact, got a little nose itch right there. We're an hour and a half in, folks. Despite the fact that all major election lawsuits thus far had failed, President Trump and his co-conspirators in this effort, including John Eastman and Kenneth Chesebro, pressed forward with the fake elector scheme. Ultimately, these false electoral slates, 5 of which purported to represent the, quote, duly elected electoral college votes of their states, were transmitted to executive branch officials at the National Archives and to the legislative branch, including to the office of the President of the Senate, Vice President Mike Pence. The fake electors followed Chesebro's step-by-step instructions for completing and mailing the fake certificates to multiple officials in the U.S. government. So essentially, Trump and his inner circle, and this fake elector scheme, I think, was created by John Eastman, who's, one of, Trump's puppets. He and Kenneth Chesebro essentially were like, look, we can't win these states that we're contesting, but we can fraudulently create alternative slates of electors and send them in to Congress. So that's exactly what they're doing. They're conscripting people in these states, which many of them have been indicted already, to be fake electors. These people are not responsible for electing the president, for submitting the votes for the Electoral College. They're literally made up people that are being used to say, they're literally signing a piece of paper that's fake. You can go look it up. That's like, I am certifying that Arizona was won by President Trump, and this is how we're going to vote. Total bullshit. The fake elector scheme. Look it up. I didn't think it was real the first time I heard it. I was like, yeah, that seems a little bit far-fetched that they would just have people in the Republican Party say, I'm an elector, and, fucking here it is, and just mail it into Congress and be like, sign this one instead, approve this one instead. But that's literally what happened. So the fake electors followed Chesebro's step-by-step instructions for completing and mailing the fake certificates to multiple officials in the U.S. government, complete with the registered mail stickers and return address labels identifying senders like, quote, Arizona Republican Party and, quote, Georgia Republican Party. The Wisconsin Republican Party's fake certificates apparently weren't properly delivered. However, so the Trump campaign arranged to fly them to Washington just before the joint session on January 6th and tried to deliver them to Vice President Pence via Senator Ron Johnson and Representative Mike Kelly's offices. Both Johnson and Kelly's offices attempted to do so, but Vice President Pence's aide refused the delivery. Despite pressure from President Trump, Vice President Pence and the Senate parliamentarian refused to recognize or count the unofficial fake electoral votes. Greg Jacob testified that he advised Vice President Pence on January 2nd that, quote, none of the slates that had been sent in would qualify as an alternate slate under the law, that the Senate parliamentarian, quote, was in agreement with his conclusion. So this fake electorate scheme is hatched by President Trump and his cronies. They tap these fake electors to send in these fake certificates to Congress that are not part of the election. They're completely made up. Again, you could go see them side by side with the real certificates versus the fake certificates look like. It's so wild. Like you would think, like, this is the type of scheme that like a third grader would come up with, writing a fake letter and forging his mom's signature. And you're like, this is so obvious. The teacher's going to know. This is what, Trump and his cronies are trying. They're literally like, let's just send in fake certificates and pressure Mike Pence to accept them. That way Trump wins the state instead of Biden, who actually won the state. Mike Pence says no. He doesn't even accept the certificates, the fake certificates. So then Trump's like, all right, it's on. So January 6th rolls around because January 2nd, I think, was when Pence refused the fake certificates. So January 6th rolls around. While Mike Pence and his family are hiding in a bunker under the Capitol with people chanting, hang Mike Pence, Trump and Giuliani use this time to call lawmakers and representatives to convince them to delay the certification of the election and push forward the fake electors. So Trump's basically like, fuck Mike Pence. If he's not going to do this, while he's being commandeered under the Capitol with him and his family, I'm going to use this time while Mike is, free, being led to the gallows to call these representatives and say, hey, you should probably accept these fake electors. You need to delay the certification of the election. There's a lot of fraud, blah, blah, blah. Him and Giuliani are doing this literally while Mike Pence and his family are under siege. U.S. prosecutors, this is a little tidbit I found interesting. U.S. prosecutors allege that when a White House aide told Trump, who was watching news coverage of the riot on TV, that Pence had been taken to a secure location, Trump responded, "So what? So what? So what? So what? Mike Pence is in a bunker under the Capitol with him and his family, with people rioting, saying, hang Mike Pence, and I'm tweeting that Mike Pence betrayed the country. It's no big deal. Just let it happen." I love how Trump chooses to be mindful when the world is burning down around him. Like that's truly Trump's meditative experience, is like the Capitol on fire, Mike Pence being led to the gallows, the fake electorates being certified, election fraud, just like making these threats of election fraud with no evidence. And Trump is like literally at peace with people telling him, oh my God, like, do you see the riot? Mike Pence was just taken underneath the Capitol. And Trump's like, so what? Namaste. Lean into it. Accept it. Accept yourself. Accept others. Take a sip of this ayahuasca. Just let it be. Let it in. Let it out. Breathe. Just breathe in the chaos. Breathe in the fire. Breathe in the AR-15s. Stop the steal. In. Stop the steal. That is Trump's peace. That is Trump's peace. So, and people are posting online. Again, I'm not an expert in the fake electorate scheme. I'm going off of the January 6th report, the Jack Smith indictments, the Twitter trail. And there are people that are posting online that, yeah, this happened, the fake electorate scheme, back in 1960 with the Kennedy election. Kennedy-Nixon, that this is nothing new. That Trump and his people are just using a tactic that Kennedy used back in 1960. There's nothing illegal about it. There's actually a big difference between what Kennedy did back in 1960 and what Donald Trump did in 2020, or what Donald Trump tried to do. So here's the difference. This is John F. Kennedy's fake elector plot in Hawaii. The fake elector plot in Hawaii during John F. Kennedy's 1960 election arose from a narrow victory margin, with Kennedy winning by just 115 points in the entire state of Hawaii, 115 votes. Republicans in Hawaii contested the results, leading to the creation of an alternate slate of electors that claimed that Nixon should be the rightful winner. However, this challenge was resolved relatively quickly when the state authorities certified Kennedy's electors, and the controversy did not escalate further. In contrast, Donald Trump's fake elector plot following the 2020 election was part of a broader coordinated effort to overturn the legitimate election results in multiple states. The uncontested election results, these were not contested by 115 votes. These were clearly won by Biden with no evidence of election fraud. There's a broader coordinated effort to overturn the legitimate election results in multiple states by Donald Trump and his cronies. Trump and his allies sought to create alternate electors in key swing states, claiming that they were the rightful representatives for Trump despite his loss for Biden. That's convenient that Trump is claiming that the only states that need to be fake certified, the fake electorates, are from the key swing states that would win him the election. Not, Idaho or Alaska, or North Dakota. He's not worried about the election, the election fraud in states that can't win him the election. He's only worried about the ones in the swing states that would entrench him in power. This plan culminated in an attempt to disrupt the certification of electoral votes on January 6, 2021, during which Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. Ultimately, while Hawaii's situation led to a swift resolution and certification of Kennedy's victory, Trump's efforts resulted in widespread legal failures and significant political fallout, emphasizing the extreme lengths to which he went to contest a legitimate election. So the big difference between the electorates in 1960 and 2020, 1960, isolated incident, 115 votes decided Hawaii. Nixon proposes alternate electorates, and then that's squashed completely. In 2020, there's an entire plot to overturn not just the results of one state, but 7 states, 7 key swing states in the election, using fake electorates, calling people, pressuring them to vote, using time while Mike Pence is bunkered underneath the Capitol to call representatives with Giuliani, which, by the way, if you look into this, there is no White House call log for 3 to 4 hours for Donald Trump during the Capitol riots. From like 2 p.m. to around 6 p.m., calls were not recorded as they usually were. And there was some excuse given for this, like some aide that was supposed to be there wasn't there. But there were witnesses to Trump making calls and Giuliani on record making calls to representatives and people in the legislature to essentially pressure them to say, hey, certify these electorates and also look into the election fraud. That doesn't exist. There's no evidence for it, but you need to look into it, all while Trump is bunkered underneath the Capitol with his family. So big difference between Kennedy and Trump. And I'm going to take a quick break because we are now almost an hour and 40 minutes in. And I'm going to de-phlegm myself because I feel some phlegm coming in the back of my throat and it's getting a little bit annoying, and I'll be right back after a quick phlegm break. All right, let's get into Trump's failed election fraud lawsuits. So like I said, Trump and his cronies launched 64 court cases across 7 different states to try to overturn the results of the election based on election fraud. Every case was dismissed without standing or rejected for insufficient evidence and failure to meet legal standards. I should say every case except one was dismissed without standing or rejected for insufficient evidence and failure to meet legal standards. Without standing means that the plaintiffs cannot show that they were directly harmed by the alleged actions, which would have been Trump. And this means that they cannot proceed with their claims as they have not established the necessary legal basis to seek relief from the court. One case Trump was successful out of 64 was a minor procedural victory in Pennsylvania about observing ballot counting, which had zero effect on the outcome of the election. The big one that I want to get into, which was the subject of the ballot box, the mystery black box conspiracy in Georgia, is Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman. So in the wake of the 2020 presidential election, Rudy Giuliani, then personal attorney to former President Donald Trump, made numerous allegations over widespread voter fraud, focusing particularly on election workers Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman. These accusations were prominently featured during hearings and in various outlets, leading to significant repercussions for both women. So here is the edited video and Giuliani's claims. Giuliani presented a video during a legislative hearing in December 2020, claiming it showed Moss and Freeman engaging in illicit activities while counting ballots at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia. In his assertions, Giuliani alleged that the two women were seen pulling ballots from under a table and counting them in secret, implying that they were involved in a conspiracy to manipulate the election results in favor of Joe Biden. This edited version of the video was misleading. Again, this is the video that was hours long, and you could clearly see on the footage that election workers at first left and they were called to go back. They kept having to keep voting, and then ballot boxes were pulled out from underneath the table from when they were brought in, and then clearly they resumed the counting. But in the video that was edited, it looks like this secret box, this 2-minute video out of like a 3+ hour video, this secret box was pulled out from underneath a shady table And people are like, where did that come from? And if you see it on Twitter, like a 2-minute video, you're like, yeah, that looks suspicious. But it was purposely edited from a longer video, which Giuliani and Trump and his people both had, by the way. And they chose instead to circulate this 2-minute, completely edited out of context, completely infactual, just nowhere near showing what actually happened, and set Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss up for unprecedented harassment that no human should have to deal with. So this is what's going on right now. The edited version of the video was misleading. Giuliani and his allies selectively presented clips that omitted crucial context, framing the actions of Moss and Freeman as suspicious and nefarious. The video was intended to evoke concern over election integrity, suggesting that the women were participating in a coordinated effort to commit fraud. In the actual video, the full footage told a different story. The actual video showed that the ballots were being counted, and they were legitimate, and there was no evidence of wrongdoing. Again, Trump and Giuliani were presented with the full video. You could go online and watch the full video. You can watch people walk through this who are election officials and people in Congress and whoever saying, like, this is what happened. This 2-minute video was completely edited out of context to make it look nefarious. And that's that. Election officials clarified that the, quote, suitcases that Giuliani referred to were simply standard ballot containers that had been mistakenly labeled as suspicious. Additionally, the counting was conducted in accordance with Georgia's election procedures. Independent observers, including members of both political parties. Again, there are so many Republicans that are going to Trump and his, inner circle that is somehow still with him at this point, saying, like, the jig is up. There's zero evidence. You're fucked. Just concede, save some face. People on both sides are pretty unanimous on this. Aside from the few people in Trump's inner circle, his group of strike force corrupt lawyers who will do anything he says, people in the DOJ, like that guy, not Jeffrey Rosen, the other guy that was underneath Rosen that was like, yeah, I'll sign that fake letter if you make me attorney general. Like, aside from those people, like, people are pretty in agreement of like, yeah, there's nothing here. We'll watch the video. It's fucking bullshit. Additionally, the counting was conducted in accordance with Georgia's election procedures. Independent observers, including members of both political parties, were present during the counting process, which further corroborated the legitimacy of the operations conducted by Moss and Freeman. During a December 10th, 2020 appearance in Georgia, Giuliani falsely accused Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss, two black public servants shown in the Fulton County video, of, quote, surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine. In fact, Moss had been given a ginger mint by her mother, Ruby Freeman. You can see this in the actual, and I apologize for the disgusting phlegm removal. I've had some back trip today, and it's starting to build up after over an hour and 50 minutes recording the podcast, but we march on. There is a funny moment. I mean, it's not funny because Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman's lives were destroyed for a long time, but Freeman says, or Moss is questioned in the January 6th deposition, like, what is this USB drive vial of, heroin cocaine thing that Giuliani is talking about? And she's like, yeah, it was a ginger mint from my mom that she passed me. And Giuliani's like, yeah, they're smoking crack and counting ballots. And yeah, so that wraps up the Georgia case, which no one even, of 10% intelligence was taking seriously at all. If anyone who saw the full video, it was incredibly obvious what happened. The aftermath of the Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss accusations by Trump and Giuliani Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss were targeted by Trump and Giuliani hundreds of times in public statements and tweets. Trump publicly called them monsters. They were harassed incessantly, received hundreds of death threats, and fled their home for months. Imagine being targeted by the President of the United States, calling you a monster, tweeting over and over again that you are stealing the election by, smoking crack vials and counting ballots 3 times and pulling out this secret, black box of ballots that was just normal procedure when you watch the full video, which Trump and Giuliani both had. Imagine being targeted by Giuliani and the President of the United States over and over again for months, and them both being tapped into this gang of hundreds of thousands of millions of people, just undying MAGA supporters who will do anything to appease Trump, their mothership leader. Imagine the harassment that these two women were facing, because I don't think that I can fully picture that. To have the President of the United States essentially put your head on a stake, release your photo and say, whoever brings me her fucking head gets a prize, which, calling her a monster on Twitter. There were people who gathered outside of Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman's house on January 6th. I cannot imagine the amount of vitriol and harassment that these two women went through that could have been totally prevented by Giuliani and Trump just not being two-faced fucking piece of shit scumbag liars. This is Ruby Freeman's testimony to the January 6th committee in the aftermath of the allegations by Trump and Giuliani. She says, "My name is Ruby Freeman. I've always believed it when God says that he'll make your name great. But this is not the way it was supposed to be. I could have never imagined the events that followed the presidential election in 2020. For my entire professional life, I was Lady Ruby. My community in Georgia, where I was born and lived my whole life, knew me as Lady Ruby. Now I won't even introduce myself by name anymore. I get nervous when I bump into someone I know at the grocery store who says my name. I'm worried about who's listening. I get nervous when I have to give my name for food orders. I'm always concerned of who's around me. I've lost my name. I've lost my reputation. I've lost my sense of security. All because a group of people, starting with number 45, President Trump, and his ally Rudy Giuliani, decided to scapegoat me and my daughter Shaye to push their own lies about how the presidential election was stolen. Freeman's sense of dread is well-founded. According to federal prosecutors, a member of the Oath Keepers militia, convicted of multiple offenses for his role on January 6, had a document in his residence with the words "death list" written across the top. His death list contained just 2 names, Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss. All the result of Trump and Giuliani. Giuliani was then, of course, brought to court by Ruby Moss and Shaye Freeman for defaming them with no proof of election fraud, saying these things about them being drug addicts, triple counting ballots, being part of an election fraud scheme with zero evidence to back it up. Giuliani then admits in court that he made the whole thing up and that the First Amendment gave him the right to lie. Giuliani admits this. I lied because the First Amendment gives me the right to. I was lying about the whole thing. I made it up. I was talking out of my fucking ass. I was doing anything as Trump's puppet with his hand so far up my ass, who Trump has disavowed, by the way. Giuliani's nowhere to be found near Trump because Giuliani served his purpose for Trump. Giuliani was trying to spread election fraud lies and overturn the 2020 election. He failed. So Trump was like, I don't know that guy anymore. Giuliani made the whole thing up. First Amendment said the First Amendment gave him the right to lie, which, of course, the First Amendment does not protect speech that inflicts damage upon others, puts their safety in serious jeopardy, wrongfully and recklessly injures others' reputations, or incites others to commit violent acts, which pretty much Giuliani and Trump did all of the above to Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman. The court ordered in late 2023 that Giuliani was found guilty of defamation, of course, because there was nothing to back up his claims in Georgia, not a single shred of evidence or witness testimony from people on both sides, Republicans and Democrats watching the count. Giuliani was found guilty of defamation and spreading lies about Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss, and he was ordered to pay them $148 million in damages. Giuliani then declares bankruptcy. He's going through a whole shitstorm right now where his assets, like I think Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman were just given Giuliani's apartment, and then Giuliani has residences in Florida. He's trying to hold on to his expensive watches that were given to him and car. Like, Giuliani's done. He staked his name and his reputation on complete and total utter bullshit lies for Trump about election fraud. Exposed Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman, who are, working to legitimately count election votes. He subjected them to months and months and years at this point of harassment and death threats, having to flee their homes. Their life becomes an absolute shitstorm. And now Giuliani's has as well, essentially losing everything. And then this is a common theme for people who support Trump. They lie. Trump convinces them to lie. Trump convinces them to put their reputation on the line. They do it. And then once they get, fucked up the ass, once they get staked and the court comes down on them, Trump disavows that person and says, I no longer know you. You served your purpose. Thank you. Almost like a mobster, like a Tony Soprano type. Like, you worked for me, but now you're in jail. Just sit there and don't snitch. Fucking serve your time. You put your neck on the line for me. But now you're in jail and I don't associate with you anymore. But the difference is that mobsters often will take care of people in jail who don't snitch, whereas Donald Trump's like, yeah, I don't give a shit. Like, you're dead to me. So Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman, get that cash, that 148 million. I don't know how much of the 148 million you'll actually see, but you'll at least see a few mil. Hopefully a few dozen. So get those fucking cash, stack that paper. Giuliani's a piece of shit. So yeah, get that paper. That is the Georgia election. And to end this off, because I know it's been a long time, this is a long solo episode, I'm trying to get all the points in, and I feel my voice starting to leave my body along with my soul. But I want to go into the last point to wind this down, which is that the guardrails that existed during Trump's first presidential run no longer exist in 2024. The laws and the accountability to the president for being pursued for criminal acts no longer exist. And Donald Trump may be entering an office without guardrails, with much fewer guardrails than 2020. He has learned his lesson. He will more easily be able to enact whatever he wants to do with election fraud, with entrenching his power, with opening, fraudulent investigations, with essentially assassinating the reputation of American citizens, or assassinating American citizens themselves, as we'll get into with this Supreme Court ruling. But due to the Supreme Court ruling of Trump versus the United States, any guardrails for the president, almost all guardrails, I'll say, for the president committing criminal acts are now gone. So think about that. Think about what Trump did in 2020, and now think about that without any of the, safety nets that were able to at least quell his Stop the Steal movement and all the other fraudulent shit. So in 2023, Trump was indicted for the conspiracy, and this is the Supreme Court ruling of Trump versus the United States. So in 2023, Trump was indicted for conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election by knowingly spreading false claims of election fraud to obstruct the certification of the election results. The Supreme Court's response was, no, Trump did not obstruct the election process. That, Trump didn't do anything wrong. The Supreme Court actually said, under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. And he is entitled at least presumptive immunity from prosecutions for his official acts. There is no immunity for unofficial acts. So essentially what that means is when Trump was indicted for conspiracy to try to overturn the election, the Supreme Court said, well, we're not going to say he didn't try to obstruct the election process, but because the president is committing a crime in a presidential official manner, he can't be held accountable. That was the Supreme Court's ruling. Not everyone on the Supreme Court voted for this. There were dissidents for this ruling, which we'll get into. But some other background information is Jack Smith, the special counsel for the U.S. Department of Justice, just re-indicted Trump in October on the grounds that the election fraud falls outside of the official acts of the president. So the Supreme Court said, all the shit that Donald Trump's being accused of with the election fraud, with January 6th, and inciting a violent insurrection, that falls under presidential official duties. So he is immune for those official acts. And we'll get into what that means. Jack Smith says, no, those are not official acts because President Trump did that as a candidate running for president. And the office of the president does not, the office of the president is indifferent to who occupies that role next. So anything that Trump took as a candidate, an electoral candidate, is not official presidential conduct, so therefore he should not be immune to election fraud, tampering, and interfering with the DOJ and inciting a violent insurrection. So Trump was re-indicted on the grounds that election fraud falls outside of official acts of the president. We'll see what happens. But the current Supreme Court ruling still has massive implications on what future presidents can get away with. So this is what Justice Sotomayor on Trump versus this is what Justice Sotomayor has to say on the Trump versus U.S. ruling, who was a dissenting judge on this, this ruling. She did not agree. She did not vote positively for this ruling. Justice Sotomayor says the court effectively creates a law-free zone around the president, upsetting the status quo that has existed since the founding. The new official acts immunity now lies like a loaded weapon for any president that wishes to place his own interests, his own political survival, or his own financial gain above the interests of the nation. The president is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way, under the majorities, he will now be insulated from criminal protection and he will now be insulated from criminal prosecution. Order the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organize a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Take a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. Immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That is the majority's message today. And that is Justice Sotomayor, a dissenting judge. So, for example, with the Supreme Court essentially saying that no official actions of the president can be criminally prosecuted, that you're immune from all core official actions. One of the core official actions of the president, presumably, is commanding the military, being the head of the executive branch. Any action associated with that or on the periphery, according to this ruling, the president would have absolute immunity from. So the president would, in theory, be immune for, like Sotomayor says, using Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival. Kamala Harris, because Trump's not president now, but like whoever, in theory tries to go against Trump if he wins office in 2024, the president in theory would be immune from using the American military forces on political rivals or even against Americans on our own soil, because that falls under the official powers of the president. Also, the DOJ is an official function of the president. The president, in theory, could be immune from creating sham investigations and fabricating evidence, like Trump has already proven he will do if given the opportunity with election fraud, with no basis for claiming such. There is, as part of the Supreme Court vs. Trump Act, there is tons of guidance on what defines an official act of the president in the Supreme Court ruling, and little to no guidance on what defines an unofficial act. This is a quote from the ruling. The immunity the court has recognized, therefore, extends to the outer perimeter of the president's official responsibilities, covering actions so as long as they are not manifestly or palpably beyond his authority. That is the vaguest shit I've ever heard. It is so unclear. What does it mean? The outer perimeter never gets defined in this ruling. Unofficial acts are never clearly defined. It's just that, like, an unofficial act is defined by the space that official act doesn't occupy. But official act is defined as anything that extends to the outer perimeter of the president's official responsibilities, but the outer perimeter is never defined. So this whole ruling is so loosely drawn out that you could make a case for essentially anything the president does as being an official act, which he would therefore be immune from. Another quote from the ruling, in dividing official from unofficial conduct, courts may not inquire into the president's motives. Such a, quote, highly intrusive inquiry would risk exposing even the most obvious instances of official conduct to judicial examination on mere allegation of improper purpose, nor may courts deem an action unofficial merely because it alleges nor may courts deem an action unofficial merely because it allegedly violates a generally applicable law. So in theory, this would protect any future president from facing charges of election interference, which Trump has already proven that he will go through any lengths to interfere in future elections. Justice Sotomayor says, quote, the main takeaway of today's decision is that all the president's official acts defined without regard to motive or intent are entitled to immunity that is, quote, at least presumptive and quite possibly, quote, absolute. Whenever the president wields the enormous power of his office, the majority says the criminal law, at least presumptively, cannot touch him. The official acts immunity has, quote, no firm grounding in constitutional text, history, or precedent. Indeed, those standard grounds for constitutional decision-making all point in the opposite direction. No matter how you look at it, the majority official acts immunity is utterly indefensible. And I think she's exactly right, because over the last 250 years, presidents have largely assumed that they could be held criminally liable for at least some of their conduct. This decision comes out and says explicitly in clear language that presidents are immune from nearly all criminal action, and unofficial acts are not defined at all. There's no definition for unofficial acts, so you can make an argument that everything the president does, almost anything a president does, could fall under official action, which is obviously, incredibly dangerous. Justice Jackson, another dissenting judge, says, to fully appreciate the oddity of making the criminal immunity determination turn on the character of the president's responsibilities, consider what the majority says is one of the president's conclusive and preclusive prerogatives: the president's power to remove those who wield executive power on his behalf. So the president is allowed to remove people in power in the executive branch. While the president may have the authority to decide to remove the attorney general, for example, the question here is whether the president has the option to remove the attorney general by, say, poisoning him to death. Put another way, the issue here is not whether the president has exclusive removal power, but whether a generally applicable criminal law prohibiting murder can restrict how the president exercises that authority. So in theory, this would give the president immunity from poisoning his cabinet because removing those in power is a quote-unquote official presidential action, which is insane. That anything that is official or on the outer perimeter of being official, which certainly removing people from the executive branch is, technically, if you poison someone in the executive branch, you're removing them. Are you immune from that action as president? According to this ruling, yeah, you would be. You would be immune from poisoning people in your own cabinet. Another thing to note about this decision is that the judgment on presidential immunity only argues one side. This whole judgment is saying that the president should have immunity when it comes to core powers so that he doesn't have fear to act boldly, so that you don't restrict the president in any way from acting. You don't want him to have any thoughts in the back of his mind that, I could be prosecuted for this if I'm acting on behalf of the American people. But the other side the other side of the argument is, shouldn't the president have some reservations about certain actions? Shouldn't the president be hesitant about certain things, like war crimes, like bribery, like ordering assassinations? These should be things that the president is reserved about, that you're not just, absolutely immune from, that you should have to think about doing these things because they matter. They are huge, they have huge implications for not just people in the United States, but also, citizens of the world, people around the world that are, under the superpower of the United States. Some commentators, and I like this analogy, some commentators have outlined the decision like this. The office of the president is like a gun. You have the right to get elected to use that gun however you want. Your motives and purpose for using that gun are irrelevant. Criminal law no longer applies to your use of that gun under this ruling. Criminal law does not apply to how you use that gun under this ruling. But the bottom line is, I trust Kamala holding that gun much more than I do Trump. And think about who you want to have in power with these guardrails gone. Because essentially, look, my takeaways from this is that Trump has learned his lessons from 2020 and he won't make the same mistakes again. He's not an idiot. Pence failed him. Pence failed to go along with his schemes. There were Republicans in Trump's party and Trump's inner circle, rightfully so, who turned against Trump and were like, dude, this is fucking crazy. There's no evidence of election fraud. Stop pushing this shit. You need to, William Barr, everyone, all the quotes we listed through in the beginning of the podcast, yeah, you lost. Get the fuck over it. People turned against him and ended up leading to stopping the attempt by Trump to coup the government and overturn the election fraudulently. I don't want to see a 2024 Trump empowered by these new Supreme Court immunity laws that essentially make it impossible to prosecute him for nearly all crimes. There will be zero guardrails in 2024. I think this is a terrible decision by the Supreme Court for whoever holds office of the president in the future, but especially Donald Trump, who has proven that he will do whatever it takes to entrench his power, even at the cost of democracy. He's already, he's tried to block the peaceful transfer of power in 2020. There's no reason to think why he wouldn't do it if he became president in 2024 when it became time for him to leave office. And the other thing that I want to end this on, because it's a positive note, is that Mike Pence and the Republicans who refuse to bow for Trump and go along with the fake elector scheme are heroes. Because in many ways, it was Trump who tried to take advantage of the institutions, and the institutions are made up of human beings, and human beings stood up like Mike Pence and other Republicans and Democrats as well, who refused to bow to Trump. So this isn't an anti-Republican podcast. This is the Case Against Trump podcast. Mike Pence is a huge hero in this story who is a Republican. He refused to bow to Trump when him and his family were trapped underneath the Capitol. People were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Trump was pressuring him immensely to certify these fake elector votes to go along with his scheme. If he had bent we might be in a very different place today. If other people had bent in the Republican Party, we could be in a very different place today. Mike Pence and the Republicans who refused to bow to Trump are absolute heroes in my mind. And with all that being said, I'll be voting for Kamala Harris. This is the Zach Show. I'm a dumbass piece of shit podcaster, degenerate, that's done a little bit of research, and this is what I came up with. So take everything with 1,000 grains of salt. Make your own decision. Vote for whoever the fuck you want to vote for. Or don't. But this is what I'll be doing in 2024. So yeah. See you next time.